What if I told you it costs more to lock up an inmate in New York City than to stay in one of the most luxurious hotels in the world? I'm talking about the Burj Al Arab in Dubai, the Mandarin Oriental in New York, or La Réserve in Paris, where the world's elite indulge in lavish suites, fine dining, and personal butlers. The numbers are staggering. In 2021, it cost taxpayers $556,539 per year. That's $1,525 per day to incarcerate a single person. That's more than tuition at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton combined. But instead of world-class education, inmates get overcrowded cells, rampant violence, and barely edible food. And here's where things get even crazier. In 2019, the cost was $334,000 per inmate. By 2020, it skyrocketed to $447,000. Now, over $500,000 per prisoner, even as jail populations decline. So, where is all that money going? Who's profiting? Who's getting rich while communities are torn apart? And more importantly, how did we create a system where incarceration is more profitable than rehabilitation? This is the business of mass incarceration. The United States is called the land of the free, but that's hard to believe when you realize it locks up more people than any other country on earth. The US makes up just 4% of the world's population, but holds 20% of the world's prisoners. China has 1.4 billion people, but 1.7 million prisoners. The US has only 340 million people, but 2.1 million prisoners. That means 1 in every 5 prisoners on the planet is sitting in an American jail or prison. But how did this happen? For decades, incarceration rates were relatively stable. That all changed in 1971. June 17, 1971. President Richard Nixon, America's public enemy number 1 is drug abuse. With those words, the war on drugs began. More arrests, harsher sentences, overcrowded prisons. But let's get one thing straight. This wasn't just about public safety, because while crime rates fluctuated, incarceration rates never stopped climbing. Between 1980 and 2000, the US prison population increased by 500%. Why? Because locking people up became big business. 1984, the first private prison was built in Texas. From that moment, incarceration wasn't just a form of punishment, it became a profit-driven industry. Prisons weren't just holding cells anymore. They were multi-billion-dollar enterprises. And like any business, they needed a steady stream of customers. Enter tough-on-crime laws. During the 1980s and 1990s, a flood of policies guaranteed prison beds would stay full. Mandatory minimum sentences. Judges were forced to hand out decades-long prison terms, even for nonviolent drug offenses. 3 strikes laws. Commit 3 crimes, even minor ones, life in prison. Truth in sentencing. No more parole. If you get 20 years, you serve all 20. These laws weren't about stopping crime. They were about keeping prisons full and the money flowing. And it worked. Between 1971 and today, the US incarceration rate exploded by 700%. By the 2000s, America had built the largest prison system in human history. And behind every prison contract, every sentencing law, and every new jail construction project, there was money to be made. But who was making it? Let's talk about the players behind this billion-dollar industry. Imagine a prison cell slamming shut. A young man, sentenced to years behind bars, stares at the concrete walls. His life, his future, sealed away. But somewhere in a high-rise office in Manhattan, investors are celebrating. Because every new prisoner means more profit. Private prisons, the business of captivity. The Geo Group and CoreCivic, the 2 biggest private prison companies in America, don't just operate prisons. They run immigration detention centers, electronic monitoring programs, and even re-entry services. Their business model? More inmates equals more revenue. Wall Street's biggest investors. Who funds these prison operators? BlackRock and Vanguard, the world's largest asset management firms, are major shareholders in both Geo Group and CoreCivic. Ownership breakdown. BlackRock owns 14.20% of Geo Group and 16.75% of CoreCivic. Vanguard owns between 8.2 to 9.1% of Geo Group and 11.17% of CoreCivic. These firms don't just invest in prisons, they profit from incarceration. How do they keep prison populations growing? The prison industry isn't just hoping for more inmates. It's actively engineering a system that ensures a steady flow of prisoners. How? Through laws, policies, and financial incentives that guarantee jails and prisons never run empty. Step 1. Lobbying for tougher laws. Imagine a high-powered boardroom in Washington, D.C., where executives from private prison corporations sit down with politicians and lawmakers. Their goal? Pass harsher sentencing laws that funnel more people into the system. Private prison companies donate millions to political campaigns to elect officials who support tough-on-crime policies. They work with organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, to draft bills that expand mandatory sentencing and reduce parole opportunities. Between 2010 and 2020, CoreCivic and Geo Group spent over $25 million lobbying Congress to keep the cash cow running. Step 2. Contracts with occupancy quotas. Now imagine running a business where you get paid whether or not customers walk through the door. That's exactly how private prison contracts work. Many states have contracts requiring prisons to be at least 90% full at all times. If crime rates drop and there aren't enough inmates, the government still has to pay for those empty beds. Arizona, Oklahoma, and Louisiana have 100% occupancy quotas, meaning they must keep jails completely full, even if crime declines. Step 3. Privatized immigration detention. A new gold rush. It's not just U.S. citizens getting locked up. Immigrant detention centers have become a massive revenue stream. Private prison companies operate over 70% of all immigrant detention centers. When immigration enforcement ramps up, more detainees equals more profit. Under President Trump, ICE detention contracts surge, bringing in billions for prison corporations. Step 4. Expanding surveillance and digital incarceration. Not all prisoners are behind bars. The future of the prison industry? Surveillance-based incarceration. Companies like Geo Group and CoreCivic are investing in electronic monitoring, making money off parolees and probationers. Ankle monitors, facial recognition systems, and biometric tracking create a permanent digital prison where freedom still comes with a price tag. It's not about crime. It's about contracts, quotas, and keeping the money flowing. And as long as prison corporations and their investors keep pushing policies that prioritize incarceration over rehabilitation, this system will only grow stronger. It's a perfect system for profit, but a disaster for justice. Next, we uncover how the government fuels this billion-dollar industry. It's easy to blame private prisons for the mass incarceration crisis, but here's the truth. The government plays a massive role in keeping the system alive. Over 92% of incarcerated individuals in the U.S. are housed in publicly owned prisons. But if mass incarceration isn't just a private business, why does the government have a vested interest in keeping people behind bars? The answer? Money, power, and policy. Civil asset forfeiture. When police take more than burglars, imagine driving home with cash in your car. You haven't committed a crime, but a cop pulls you over and confiscates your money without ever charging you with anything. This is called civil asset forfeiture, and it's a legal loophole that allows police to seize property they suspect is tied to criminal activity, no conviction necessary. In 2014, law enforcement seized more money through asset forfeiture than burglars stole through theft. $5 billion was taken by law enforcement through forfeiture in 2014, more than the $3.5 billion lost to burglaries the same year. Over the last 20 years, police have taken more than $68 billion from people, many of whom were never charged with a crime. In some states, law enforcement keeps up to 100% of forfeited assets, creating an incentive to seize more. The logic is simple. If police departments can fund themselves through seizures, why stop? Tough on crime laws, a government-backed pipeline to prison. Let's be clear, mass incarceration isn't a natural consequence of crime. It's a policy choice. How the government keeps prisons full, mandatory minimums. Judges are required to hand out harsh sentences, even for minor offenses. Cash bail keeps poor defendants in jail before trial, while the rich walk free. 3 strikes laws, commit 3 crimes, life in prison. Truth in sentencing, no parole. If you're sentenced to 20 years, you serve all 20. These policies weren't designed to reduce crime. They were crafted to keep people locked up longer. Private contractors in public prisons, the hidden money trail. Even though most U.S. prisons are government-run, private companies still profit enormously from incarceration. The major players include Unicor, Federal Prison Industries, a government-owned corporation that employs prisoners at pennies per hour, to manufacture goods for the federal government. Prison healthcare providers like Corizon Health and Wellpath, which earn billions in taxpayer money to provide substandard medical care to inmates. Telecom companies like Securus and GTL, which charge prisoners' families up to $25 for a single 15-minute phone call. Prison guards and unions, the other beneficiaries. It's not just corporations cashing in. Government jobs depend on mass incarceration. The U.S. employs over 420,000 correctional officers, a workforce larger than GM, Ford, and Walmart combined. Prison guard unions lobby to block prison reform that might reduce the number of inmates. In some towns, prisons are the largest employer, meaning reducing incarceration would mean economic collapse. Government spending on prisons versus education. The government isn't just funding prisons, it's prioritizing them over education. Between 1989 and 2013, state spending on prisons increased by 89%, while education funding grew by only 28%. States spend an average of $33,000 per inmate per year, compared to just $12,000 per public school student. In some states like California and New York, taxpayers spend more on incarcerating a single prisoner than it would cost to send a student to college for 4 years. Next, we expose how corporations make billions off the backs of prisoners without ever running a single prison. Every business needs a steady flow of customers to stay profitable. But what if your business was built on keeping people locked up? For private prison companies, government agencies, and corporate contractors, incarceration isn't just about punishment, it's about revenue streams. Step 1. Minimum occupancy quotas, the contract that ensures inmates. Imagine signing a contract where you get paid whether or not people show up. Sounds like a dream, right? Well, for private prison operators, it's a reality. Many states have minimum occupancy guarantees in their prison contracts, requiring them to be at least 90% full, even if crime rates drop. If there aren't enough inmates, the government still has to pay for the empty beds. In states like Arizona, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, some contracts require 100% occupancy. If crime goes down, law enforcement finds a way to fill those beds. Step 2. The prison service industry, profiting off basic necessities. Being locked up isn't cheap. Families of inmates are forced to pay inflated prices just to communicate or provide for their loved ones. Prison phone calls can cost up to $25 for just 15 minutes. Sending an email? That could cost 50 cents per page. Commissary items like soap or food are often marked up 300% to 500% compared to regular stores. These exploitative fees generate billions each year, $2.9 billion annually from families alone. Step 3. Prison labor, the hidden workforce. Imagine this: you buy a t-shirt, a car part, or even military equipment without realizing that a prisoner helped make it. Prison labor is a multi-billion-dollar industry, supplying cheap, nearly free labor to some of the biggest corporations in the world. Unicor Federal Prison Industries forces inmates to manufacture furniture, electronics, and even military gear for as little as 23 cents per hour. Inmates work in call centers for private companies, answering customer service calls without the customers ever knowing. Tech companies like Microsoft and IBM have reportedly outsourced software development to prison labor programs. And here's the catch: prisoners are forced to work. If they refuse, they face solitary confinement, loss of privileges, or even longer sentences. The business of reintegration, how former inmates are trapped in the system. Even after release, the prison industry keeps making money off former inmates. Private parole and probation programs charge former prisoners monthly supervision fees. Background check companies profit from keeping criminal records public, making it nearly impossible for former inmates to find jobs. Bail bonds companies, halfway houses, and even rehabilitation programs are all tied to the financial incentives of keeping people in the system. For many, freedom doesn't mean the end of their sentence. It just means a different kind of prison. The final question: can we break the cycle? With so much money and political influence tied to mass incarceration, can the system actually change? The bottom line: the system isn't broken. It was built this way. This isn't a mistake. It's not a coincidence. Mass incarceration was designed to be profitable, and as long as billions are at stake, those who benefit will fight to keep it that way. We've exposed how the prison industrial complex operates, from private corporations profiting off mass incarceration to government policies that keep prisons full. But the biggest question remains: how do we break the cycle? If you've made it this far, we want to hear from you. What solutions do you think could help dismantle this system? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you found this documentary eye-opening, Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping our world. The conversation starts here. Let's change the system together.